just don't like you no more.
Going through all the Oscar nominations this year, I got stuck on two. These were both films that had opposite initial effects on me, but watching again, they've sort of flipped. Making it to the Academy's final showdown is no ordinary feat, and in their own respects, they have garnered the acclaim and attention they rightfully deserve. It's an honor just to be nominated. Edward Berger is behind the third adaptation of Erich Maria Remarque's renowned anti-war novel, written a decade after the end of World War I. But in 3 adaptations, Berger's is the only one to tell the story the way it was originally told, in the German language. With a new identity, Berger writes in his own subplots that foreshadow the inevitable World War II, and while involuntarily, points a finger to the 100,000s of casualties happening right now in Ukraine, coming up on 1 year since Russia declared war. While my first thoughts on Berger's rendition were all positive, I noticed I was sitting a lot on spectacle. It forced me to watch the horror of what occurred on the front lines of Germany, and each account of trench warfare tops the last. It's a calamitous, parading representation of any kind of battlefront, and what happens on any bloody battlefield, even today. But All Quiet on the Western Front's final act contradicts the message it had been pinging off to me for the last 2 hours. Paul Baumer, the soldier we spent so much time with, is given a spotlight in his final moments of life. This takes away the meaningless we've just witnessed moments prior, and it leaves a sour taste of valued heroism in an otherwise chaotic and pointless depiction of war. You might have heard a certain French filmmaker state his opinion on war film, that no matter how an auteur might intend to critique the tragedy of war, they will always glorify what they meant to demonize, an inevitability surrounded by an audience's inability to fully empathize with things they can only experience behind a screen.
We can care deeply, selflessly, about those we know, but that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight.
The infinite and eternal audience may flock to one ideology over another, and determining whether or not anti-war films exist is not my battle to fight. I suggest watching Like Story of Old's diligent dive into understanding the war film genre. I'd rather have a piece to say about another Best Picture contender. It's one that I feel sends similar messages, but in a striking contrast. Because if there was such a thing as an anti-war film, The Banshees of Inisherin commentates on the futility of war from a safe, distant island of Inisherin, just off the coast of mainland Ireland. McDonagh's Banshees is his first work to set in his childhood vacation home of Ireland, since his previous 7 plays he wrote, the 7th titled The Banshees of Inisherin, which was never released to an audience. This new film adaptation is said to be a loose reworking to end off that original trilogy. McDonagh's portrayal of an odd conflict between 2 characters definitely calls attention to the Irish Civil War taking place on the mainland. The film takes place in the 1930s, the same time when Ireland had gained independence from England, only for them to break back into fight when 2 splitting parties of the Irish couldn't decide how to deal with demanding treaties from Britain. The Irish Republican Army wanted complete independence from the monarchy, and that meant no British rule in Ireland, while the Irish Free State supported a relationship with Britain to broker peace between the 2 nations. In Banshees, the relationship between 2 old men quickly falls apart when one of them, Colm, decides he doesn't want to be friends with Padraig anymore. It's a simple story, and although no direct connection is made, links between each character can be tied to each variable in the Civil War. Colm's desire for legacy and independence is very similar to the Irish Republican Army's reason for battle, pitted against Padraig's disdain for violence and love for niceness, which represents the ideals of the Free State of Ireland. Dominic is the innocent bystander who gets caught in the crossfire, Peter the symbol of corrupt Britain, and Siobhan the woman above it all. It's equated to each other, and with the mention of the war, it's clear there's some connection. While the Banshees of Inisherin meditates on disguised selfishness, or to search for fulfillment in conflict, or the hypocrisy in killing for peace, it all rings the same ideals I saw in Berger's war adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front. McDonagh takes a silent but potent approach on war, in an allegory that depends on character, not spectacle. And discussion of what is more anti-war is tricky to say, because while the intent and message of it is unclear in Berger's adaptation, Banshees risks a more subtle approach flying over the heads of an audience that won't pick up on what McDonagh is trying to say. But I'd actually say that All Quiet on the Western Front has more to lose. When surrounding your film with war, it is almost a guarantee you have stragglers of an audience take its message as what they want to hear. Arlie Erner's portrayal in Full Metal Jacket was the primary motivation that pushed Anthony Swofford, author of Jarhead, to enroll in the U.S. Marine Corps. The gunny pointing his finger in a recruit's face while shouting profanity, hurling insults at the recruit's manhood and mothers, and posing questions and insinuations about their sexuality indoctrinated us with the idea that coded racism, physical abuse, and psychological hazing went hand in hand with becoming a man.
Hey, let me see your real war face!
I'm sure Berger wanted to condemn war as much as Eric Maria Remarque, but in a film, any director can get trapped in the pit of heroism. It's a card up your sleeve that's too easy not to use, to have an audience relate and empathize almost automatically. I don't blame Berger for doing what those have done before him, and continually. And this adaptation is definitely more frightening and more real than anything I've ever seen. But I'm starting to think maybe striving towards that hyper-realism is not the way to go. You can only get so close, and what's really real is being on a battlefield and being scared for your life, because you could actually die. The effects, the gore, the camera staying on the violence will never reach out to the screen and express the same dreads that a soldier faces every time he sets foot in a war zone. I do think Banshees of Inisherin is the better approach to war film, but it's curious to think that the allegorical approach that McDonagh did needed this over-the-top genre to pave the way for a finer look into it. It's also important to consider that both approaches might need to exist, because everyone thinks differently. There is no right or wrong message if there are infinite ways to perceive it.
We're going to start this hour with the war in Ukraine. It began when Russian troops invaded that country 1 year ago.
Ukraine marks 1 year of war by honoring those who died to keep this country free.
Again, it's been 1 year since Russia declared war on Ukraine. And with film being such a powerful and monumental method of communication, this is a topic that should be approached often to see what we can do to tighten the message, to make it as clear as possible. For a soldier's every act of heroism lies an unknown casualty on the other side, and that in the end, violence stunts the growth of peace.